250 million years ago, Earth forgot what winter was. No ice caps, no glaciers, no frozen oceans at the poles. For tens of millions of years, the planet existed in a state no human being has ever experienced. Forests reached toward the Arctic. Warm inland seas flooded continents. The oceans supported creatures that would later seem almost impossible in size. Some of them grew so large that scientists still argue over whether the fossil measurements are even real. One predator from this world may have possessed the strongest bite force ever estimated for an animal. Another evolved eyes larger than dinner plates and patrolled oceans that stretched across the middle of continents that no longer exist. Above them, flying reptiles crossed skies generated by weather systems with no modern equivalent. None of these creatures ever experienced winter. No freezing seasons, no yearly collapse in food. For roughly 80 million consecutive years, life evolved under conditions of continuous warmth and oceans unlike anything alive today has inherited. The result was a world where the limits shaping modern animals barely seem to apply anymore. But worlds like that do not last forever. Very slowly, the planet began to cool again. The seas retreated, temperatures fell, and when cold finally returned, it did not just erase species, entire kinds of life disappeared with it. Body plans and ecosystems that evolution has never recreated since. So tonight, we are stepping into the longest warm age complex life has ever known, to understand the brutal creatures it produced and why the planet that created them can never truly exist again. But before we start, let me know in the comments if you have any topic suggestions you would like me to cover in future videos. Now, let's descend into the lost world that existed before winter returned to Earth, far beneath the deserts, forests, and cities of the modern planet. The crust still carries the scars of a world tearing itself apart, slowly enough that no living thing could ever witness the full motion. Around 250 million years ago, the supercontinent Pangaea began to split along fractures thousands of kilometers long. The ground opened in immense rift systems stretching across entire regions of Earth, and from those openings came heat, lava, and something less visible but far more transformative: carbon dioxide released continuously into the atmosphere over spans of time so long they resist ordinary comprehension. These were not isolated volcanic mountains rising briefly and falling silent. The fractures themselves became engines of atmospheric change. Magma surged upward through thinning continental crust for millions upon millions of years, feeding eruptions that altered the chemistry of the sky. Carbon dioxide concentrations climbed to roughly 4 to 8 times modern levels, thickening the atmosphere's ability to trap heat from the sun. In geological terms, the transition happened rapidly, and once it began, the consequences spread everywhere at once. The poles lost their permanent ice entirely. Mountain glaciers vanished. Snowfall still existed in limited places and moments, but no frozen structure endured from season to season. Water that had once been locked into ice flowed back into the oceans, raising sea levels by approximately 200 meters above those of the present day. Coastlines dissolved inward across the continents. Vast portions of low-lying land disappeared beneath shallow water, and nearly one-third of the continental surface known today slipped below warm inland seas. Those seas became the central biological machinery of the age because they spread across broad continental interiors rather than deep ocean basins. Sunlight penetrated through enormous expanses of relatively shallow water. Nutrients washed constantly from the land into sheltered marine environments where warmth remained stable throughout the year. The result was productivity at a scale modern oceans rarely sustain. Microscopic plankton bloomed in immense quantities near the surface, forming the base of food webs dense enough to support extraordinary populations above them. Global temperatures settled roughly 8 to 10 degrees Celsius higher than those of the present Earth. Forests extended toward the poles in regions that today hold ice and tundra. In the far north, conifers and fern like plants grew beneath long seasonal darkness without permanent frost. Near the equator, some sea surface temperatures reached between 35 and 37 degrees Celsius, warm enough that the upper ocean would have felt almost bath like to the touch. This greenhouse world endured across an immense stretch of time, beginning in the Triassic period around 250 million years ago, continuing through the Jurassic and into the Cretaceous. Its peak warmth arrived later, especially between 145 and 66 million years ago, when sea levels, atmospheric carbon dioxide, and marine productivity all approached their highest sustained levels of the era. Entire evolutionary dynasties emerged beneath these conditions and adapted so completely to uninterrupted warmth that their bodies became inseparable from the planet that created them. This was the world. Now meet what lived in it. In the center of North America, beneath wheat fields, highways, and quiet grasslands swept by dry wind, there once moved an inland sea so immense that it divided the continent completely in two. For roughly 25 million years, the western interior seaway stretched from the Gulf of Mexico to the Arctic Ocean in an unbroken corridor of warm salt water, cutting through the continent like a second equator. At its greatest extent, it reached nearly 1,000 kilometers across. A person standing in modern Kansas during that age would have been suspended beneath hundreds of meters of open water, drifting above a drowned landscape hidden in permanent blue dimness. The sea itself was broad and relatively shallow across much of its length, which allowed sunlight to penetrate deeply into nutrient rich water. Rivers draining vast lowlands carried minerals and organic material into the basin continuously, feeding blooms of microscopic life near the surface. Those blooms fed fish in extraordinary numbers, and the fish fed predators at a density that now survives mostly as fossil bone compressed into chalk and shale beneath the plains. Nowhere on Earth has preserved a clearer marine snapshot of the warm world than these rocks. Thousands of specimens recovered from Kansas alone have allowed paleontologists to reconstruct an ecosystem with unusual precision, not as isolated skeletons scattered across deep time, but as entire communities sharing the same water together. In this single inland sea lived mosasaurs, ranging from sleek 3-meter hunters to giants exceeding 17 meters in length. Long-necked plesiosaurs moved through the deeper layers below them, while giant predatory fish over 6 meters long hunted the upper water column with jaws built for violent acceleration. Sharks crossed between these layers constantly, and above the surface pterosaurs, with wingspans of roughly 6 meters, glided over the water searching for schools near the light. Among the largest animals in the Seaway was Archelon iscaros, the greatest turtle ever confirmed by the fossil record. Its flippers stretched approximately 4.6 meters from tip to tip, and its weight approached 2,200 kilograms. It swam through water covering what is now South Dakota, a region presently defined by dry prairie and distant hills. The shell of Archelon was lighter and less rigid than that of most modern sea turtles, giving the animal a broad, flexible frame suited for long movement through open water. The sheer number of large predator fossils preserved within the seaway hints at something difficult to picture in a modern ocean. Predators can only exist in abundance when prey exists in even greater abundance beneath them. Every mosasaur vertebra and shark tooth implies vast populations of fish ammonites, and smaller marine reptiles, moving continuously through the basin in numbers capable of sustaining entire dynasties of hunters simultaneously. This sea existed because the planet itself had changed shape beneath warmth that endured for millions of years. With no permanent ice locking water at the poles, the ocean rose high enough to flood the continent's interior and remain there across geological ages. Then, slowly, the process reversed. Around 70 million years ago, the Seaway began retreating as temperatures gradually declined, and the first returning ice locked small amounts of water away once more. Shorelines crept inward. Depth became distance. By 66 million years ago, the sea was gone, leaving only sediment, fossils, and silence beneath the continent that had once drowned beneath it. A giant animal is not built only from muscle and bone, it is built from surplus. Every additional meter of length, every ton of flesh, every year added to a lifespan depends on energy moving upward through an ecosystem without interruption. In the modern ocean, that flow rises and falls constantly, with seasons, temperature shifts, migrations, and periods of scarcity. Even the largest living marine animals exist inside cycles of feast and reduction. The warm world operated under different arithmetic. Warm water alone does not create giants. In many modern tropical seas, large animals are actually less common than in colder productive regions where nutrient upwelling feeds dense concentrations of life. The ancient inland seas combined conditions that rarely coexist today. Nutrients remained abundant near the surface, feeding continued without seasonal collapse, and environmental stability allowed animals to keep growing year after year without long interruptions. Together, these forces altered the biological ceiling for body size across both sea and land. Near the base of the food web, immense phytoplankton blooms converted sunlight into living matter at extraordinary rates. Sheltered shallow seas, flooded continental margins, and continuous mineral runoff created ideal conditions for microscopic life to multiply across enormous areas. Ammonites drifted through these waters in immense numbers beside dense schools of fish and countless smaller invertebrates. Predator populations could only persist because prey biomass beneath them existed at levels difficult to compare directly with modern oceans. The absence of prolonged seasonal decline changed the rhythm of growth itself. Modern marine predators experience recurring limitations. Some migrate vast distances following shifting prey. Others slow metabolically during colder months when energy becomes harder to obtain. In the warm world, those interruptions weakened or disappeared entirely. A large marine reptile could feed continuously across the entire annual cycle, adding mass every month rather than pausing growth through long periods of reduced intake. Evidence for this uninterrupted development survives inside fossil bone. Thin microscopic cross sections from mosasaur skeletons preserve growth structures resembling the rings within old trees. In animals living under strong seasonal stress, those rings narrow during colder periods when growth slows. In many mosasaurs, the pattern remains comparatively uniform, suggesting bodies that continue developing steadily across the year. Some of the largest known individuals are estimated to have lived 40 to 50 years, while continuing to accumulate size throughout much of that span. The mathematics becomes increasingly dramatic over long lifetimes. An animal capable of adding tissue continuously for 5 decades reaches dimensions fundamentally different from one forced into repeated annual slowdowns. Over millions of years, natural selection shaped bodies around this uninterrupted abundance, favoring larger predators able to exploit prey populations dense enough to sustain them. The same principle extended onto land beneath the greenhouse atmosphere. Plant growth accelerated under elevated carbon dioxide concentrations, producing forests with immense biological output. Patagotitan mayarum, presently the largest confirmed dinosaur, weighed roughly 69 tons. Such mass required constant intake from landscapes capable of replacing vegetation as quickly as it disappeared into enormous digestive systems. In a colder seasonal world, ecosystems struggle to maintain that level of sustained productivity across entire continents. Gigantism during this era was not an evolutionary accident suspended briefly against the normal rules of biology. It emerged naturally from a planet where energy moved continuously through warm oceans and dense forests without winter interrupting the flow. Remove the annual bottleneck, and life expands quietly toward the furthest dimensions its anatomy can sustain. Long before the inland seas filled with mosasaurs and giant turtles, another lineage already moved through the ancient oceans with quiet mastery. The ichthyosaurs appeared near the beginning of the warm era, around 250 million years ago, emerging from reptilian ancestors that once walked on land. Over time, their bodies transformed so completely from marine life that they came to resemble creatures that would not evolve until hundreds of millions of years later. Their silhouettes mirrored dolphins and fast swimming tuna with startling precision, narrow snouts cutting forward, dorsal fins stabilizing the body, and crescent shaped tails driving them through open water with efficient power. The resemblance was not inheritance, but convergence, different branches of life arriving independently at nearly the same design. Their reign lasted more than 150 million years. In comparison, whales have existed for roughly 50 million years, and modern shark groups in their current forms for perhaps 100 million. Ichthyosaurs endured through changing coastlines, shifting oceans, and entire geological periods, while remaining among the dominant marine animals of the planet. Some species reached dimensions unprecedented for their time. Shonisaurus sicaniensis, discovered in what is now British Columbia, stretched to an estimated 21 meters in length. The animal moved through the sea with a body longer than a modern semi-trailer truck, making it potentially the largest creature known to have existed anywhere on Earth up to that point in deep history. Its skull alone measured several meters, and its ribcage enclosed lungs capable of sustaining immense dives through the dark water below the surface layers. Other ichthyosaurs specialized not only in size, but in perception. Temnodontosaurus possessed eyes reaching approximately 26 centimeters in diameter, among the largest eyes ever evolved by any vertebrate. Within the eye sat a rigid ring of interlocking bone plates called the sclerotic ring, supporting the structure against the immense pressure of deep water. These eyes likely gathered faint traces of light far below the sunlit ocean, where squid and fish drifted through cold darkness, invisible to shallower predators. Soft tissue preserved in rare fossils has revealed further details once thought impossible to recover. Skin impressions show streamlined bodies adapted for constant swimming, while internal anatomy suggests elevated metabolic rates, consistent with warm-blooded physiology. Ichthyosaurs independently evolved internal heat regulation long before marine mammals appeared, allowing sustained activity across wide temperature ranges and long open ocean migrations. Some of the most intimate fossils preserve mothers in the process of giving birth. Inside stone slabs split open after millions of years, small skeletons emerge tail first from the birth canal exactly as dolphins do today. This orientation reduces the risk of drowning during delivery and confirms that ichthyosaurs spent their entire lives at sea without returning to land to reproduce. Their young entered the ocean already swimming. For most of the warm era, they remained among the great rulers of marine life, yet their decline began around 90 million years ago. The causes remain partly obscured within changing ocean chemistry, altered prey distribution, and ecological pressure from rising competitors spreading outward from coastal habitats. Fossil diversity diminished gradually rather than collapsing suddenly, as though the dynasty were thinning over millions of quiet years. Along warm shorelines and shallow seas, another reptilian lineage had already begun adapting to the water. Waiting within the margins of the world, the ichthyosaurs once dominated. Near the shorelines of the late Cretaceous world, among tidal flats and shallow coastal waters warmed beneath a greenhouse sky, small reptiles moved through mangroves and estuaries with bodies still recognizably terrestrial. They were lean, elongated animals, rarely more than a few meters long, hunting fish and smaller prey close to land. At the time, they occupied only the margins of marine life, while the open ocean remained dominated by older dynasties already established across millions of years. Yet, within a remarkably short span of geological time, those coastal reptiles transformed into something entirely different. Around 98 million years ago, the earliest mosasaurs still retained limbs capable of movement on land. Their bodies resembled large aquatic monitor lizards more than the fully marine predators they would later become. Then the transformation accelerated. Within roughly 10 million years, they diversified into more than 40 genera spread across every major ocean basin on Earth and evolved into apex hunters exceeding 17 meters in length. Fossils now appear from New Zealand, Morocco, Antarctica, North America, and Northern Europe, revealing an expansion so rapid that it remains one of the most dramatic evolutionary radiations ever documented in marine vertebrates. Their ancestry remained reptilian to the core. Mosasaurs were not related to dolphins, sharks, or marine dinosaurs. Their closest living relatives are monitor lizards, including the Komodo dragon, while snakes share a more distant branch of the same broader lineage. The ocean reshaped their bodies with extraordinary speed. Limbs flattened into broad paddles. The spine became increasingly flexible through the tail region. Dense bones associated with shallow water ancestors gave way to lighter skeletal structures better suited for efficient swimming in open seas. For much of the 20th century, scientists imagined mosasaurs moving through water like crocodiles, pushing themselves forward, mainly by sweeping the body side to side. That image changed in 2013 when an exceptionally preserved fossil revealed the outline of a crescent-shaped tail fluke preserved in mineralized soft tissue. The structure resembled the powerful tails of fast swimming sharks, far more than those of modern reptiles. With that discovery, the biomechanics of the animal shifted completely. Mosasaurs were no longer seen as sluggish ambush predators lingering near shorelines, but as active open ocean pursuit hunters capable of sustained speed across vast distances. Their skulls carried another innovation unlike anything in modern marine reptiles. Alongside the main teeth lining the jaws sat a second set embedded in the roof of the mouth, angled backward toward the throat. These pterygoid teeth functioned almost like a biological ratchet. Once prey entered the mouth, escape became nearly impossible. Each movement inward carried it deeper while preventing retreat, allowing mosasaurs to seize large, struggling animals and force them gradually down the throat in sections. Different species specialized rapidly. Some evolved slender jaws suited for fish, others heavy crushing teeth adapted for shelled prey. The largest forms developed immense skulls capable of overpowering nearly anything sharing their environment. In less than 10 million years, they expanded from local coastal predators into the dominant marine reptiles of the late Cretaceous Ocean. Their fossils now lie embedded in rock from every continent, including Antarctica, preserved across ancient seabeds separated today by thousands of kilometers. No earlier marine apex predator achieved such complete planetary distribution. The mosasaurs became the final great reptilian rulers of the sea, spreading through the warm world with astonishing speed until the oceans themselves seemed shaped around their presence. Stone remembers violence with remarkable patience. A broken shell buried beneath marine sediment, a tooth embedded in bone, a healed fracture sealed over by years of continued life, all survive long after flesh disappears. The mosasaurs left behind this kind of evidence in enormous quantities, and the marks preserved in those fossils reveal far more than skeletal reconstructions alone. They preserve behavior itself, frozen into calcium and rock. Across multiple ancient seabeds, ammonite shells have been recovered, bearing circular punctures that match mosasaur tooth spacing with extraordinary precision. Some of these shells belong to cephalopods more than a meter wide, protected by thick spiraled chambers of calcium carbonate. The damage patterns show crushing rather than slicing, indicating jaws capable of generating immense pressure while holding struggling prey underwater. The shell often shattered inward toward the soft body hidden inside, suggesting mosasaurs attacked not merely to wound, but to break open the protective structure entirely and consume the animal within. Other fossils preserve encounters between predators. Plesiosaur bones recovered from marine deposits sometimes carry deep gouges and punctures aligned exactly with mosasaur dentition. These injuries appear on ribs, vertebrae, and limb bones, confirming that the largest mosasaurs hunted other marine reptiles directly. They were not narrow specialists dependent on one source of food. Anything large enough to provide energy, fish, reptile, shark, or cephalopod could become prey within the same water column. Even sharks occupied a lower position in this hierarchy. In several mosasaur specimens, partially digested shark vertebrae and teeth have been discovered within the abdominal region, preserved where the stomach once lay. The relationship between sharks and apex predators in modern oceans becomes inverted here. During the late Cretaceous seas, sharks moved within ecosystems ultimately dominated by giant marine reptiles rather than by other fish. The wounds on mosasaurs themselves reveal equally harsh interactions. Some skeletons carry healed bite marks inflicted by members of their own species, evidence that individuals survived violent attacks and continued living for years afterward. The injuries appear too severe and deliberate to represent accidental contact. Territory, competition for food, and opportunistic predation likely overlapped constantly among the largest animals. A wounded mosasaur drifting through warm water with damaged ribs or shattered tail vertebrae could still heal if it survived the initial encounter long enough for bone to regrow. The physical force behind those attacks becomes clearer through biomechanical modeling. Estimates for the full jaw pressure of Tylosaurus proriger reach approximately 80,000 newtons, many times greater than the bite force of a modern lion. Such power allowed simultaneous crushing of shell, cartilage, and bone while restraining violently struggling prey. Yet not every mosasaur hunted in the same way. Some species evolved rounded blunt teeth, ideal for crushing mollusks and crustaceans across the seafloor, while others developed narrow recurved teeth suited for gripping fast-moving fish. Bone density studies add another dimension to the picture. Several species show skeletal adaptations associated with regular deep diving, indicating predators capable of moving through multiple vertical layers of the ocean rather than remaining near the surface. The warm seas supported hunting across depth as well as distance, from sunlit upper waters down into darker regions where pressure increased and visibility faded. Taken together, the wound record reveals not one predator, but an entire dynasty diversified across nearly every available ecological role. The mosasaurs did not merely dominate the ocean, they spread through it completely, filling the warm world with specialized hunters shaped for different forms of pursuit, impact, crushing, and survival all at once. Far north of the ancient warm seas, beyond forests that once covered polar coastlines, the rocks of Svalbard preserve fragments of a predator built with startling concentration. Its neck was short, its skull immense, its body shaped less for elegance than for force. In 2006, paleontologists working in the Arctic recovered remains, later named Pliosaurus funki, though the animal became widely known by another title whispered through documentaries and research papers alike, Predator X. The skull alone approached 2 meters in length. Behind it stretched a body estimated between 10 and 13 meters long, propelled through the sea by 4 muscular flippers, each roughly the size of a modern car door. Unlike the elongated silhouettes of many plesiosaurs, pliosaurs compressed much of their power into the head itself. Their bodies functioned almost as engines, carrying a mouth designed to overpower whatever it reached. Biomechanical estimates place the bite force of Predator X at approximately 33,000 newtons. For comparison, a modern great white shark produces roughly 18,000 newtons, while a saltwater crocodile generates around 16,000. The jaws of this pliosaur may have delivered one of the most powerful bites ever achieved by any marine predator directly measured through anatomical reconstruction. Yet, the structure of the teeth suggests something even more unsettling than raw force alone. The teeth were thick, conical, and interlocked tightly when the jaws closed. They lacked the flattened cutting edges seen in slicing predators. Instead, they functioned like gripping spikes designed to puncture deeply and hold. Prey seized within those jaws would not have been neatly carved apart. The evidence points toward violent shaking motions, massive neck muscles wrenching against trapped bodies until flesh and bone tore under repeated impact. Chemical traces locked within fossil enamel support the same image of dominance. Nitrogen isotope ratios, extracted from pliosaur teeth, consistently rank among the highest recorded from the warm era oceans. These isotopes accumulate upward through food chains, meaning the highest values belong to animals feeding at the very top. Pliosaurs occupied that position with remarkable consistency, consuming predators that had themselves already consumed other predators beneath them. The fossil record also preserves scars from encounters between pliosaurs themselves. Some skeletons carry healed puncture wounds, matching the spacing and depth of pliosaur teeth, particularly around the skull and flippers. The injuries healed slowly over years, indicating survivors that continued hunting long after violent clashes with rivals of similar size. Territorial conflict in such animals would have involved enormous force concentrated into brief collisions of jaws and muscle beneath open water. Their senses extended beyond sight. Internal skull casts, reconstructed through scanning techniques, reveal enlarged olfactory lobes within the brain cavity, structures associated with processing scent. In water, scent becomes drifting chemistry carried across distance by currents. Pliosaurs likely tracked prey partly through these invisible trails, detecting wounded animals or dense feeding activity far beyond visual range. For millions of years, they shared the seas with the expanding mosasaur dynasty. Fossils preserve the evidence of those meetings from both sides. Some pliosaur bones bear mosasaur bite marks, while certain mosasaur remains carry injuries matching pliosaur dentition. The encounters were not isolated accidents, but repeated interactions between two immense predatory lineages occupying overlapping worlds. In those warm oceans, dominance did not belong to a single ruler for long. It shifted gradually between dynasties of hunters powerful enough to wound one another and survive, leaving their conflicts recorded silently inside stone. Some animals appear so mechanically unusual that they seem less evolved than assembled, as though anatomy itself had been stretched into an improbable experiment. The long-necked plesiosaurs belong to that category. Their bodies combined broad torsos, compact heads, powerful flippers, and necks extended to lengths unmatched by almost any other vertebrate in Earth's history. They moved through the warm inland seas with proportions that continue to challenge biomechanical understanding even now. Among the most extreme examples was Elasmosaurus platyurus, reaching roughly 14 meters in total length. About half of that length consisted of neck alone. 72 vertebrae formed the structure, stacked one after another into a flexible column that drifted through the water ahead of the body like a living cable. Mammals solved neck construction very differently. Nearly every mammal alive today, from mice to giraffes, possesses exactly 7 neck vertebrae, regardless of total size. Elasmosaurus exceeded that number tenfold. For more than a century, researchers imagined the neck functioning like that of a striking snake, snapping rapidly sideways to seize fish. Modern biomechanical modeling gradually dismantled that image. The vertebrae and associated musculature lacked the structural support necessary for violent acceleration. A rapid strike would have twisted the neck inefficiently through water, while generating destabilizing drag along its entire length. The animal had evolved for another strategy altogether. Hydrodynamic studies now suggest the neck functioned primarily as a stealth instrument. A large body pushing toward a school of fish generates pressure waves detectable by sensitive prey long before contact occurs. A narrow neck, moving slowly from below, disturbs far less surrounding water. The plesiosaur could keep its bulk at a distance, while extending only the small head and slender forward profile toward prey. In effect, the neck allowed the animal to separate the visible source of danger from the rest of its enormous body. Their movement through the water depended on another design unlike anything alive today. Instead of relying mainly on a tail, long-necked plesiosaurs used 4 wing-shaped flippers simultaneously. The front and rear pairs worked together in coordinated underwater flight, producing lift and directional control through sweeping motions, remarkably similar to those of birds moving through air. Computational fluid simulations indicate extraordinary maneuverability at lower speeds, allowing precise movement through dense marine environments where abrupt bursts of acceleration mattered less than controlled positioning. Inside several plesiosaur skeletons, researchers have discovered clusters of polished stones preserved where the stomach once lay. These gastroliths were swallowed deliberately and carried internally for long periods. Some may have functioned as ballast, adjusting buoyancy during deep dives and stabilizing the animal while hovering in the water column. Others may have assisted in processing hard-shelled prey within the digestive tract, grinding food mechanically after swallowing. Chemical analysis, preserved within tooth enamel, adds another layer to the picture. Oxygen isotope ratios indicate body temperatures consistently warmer than the surrounding sea, evidence that these reptiles independently evolved warm-blooded metabolism. Like ichthyosaurs and later marine mammals, they generated internal heat rather than depending entirely on environmental warmth, allowing sustained activity across varying depths and conditions. Kansas fossil beds preserve their remains alongside fish, ammonites, sharks, and other marine reptiles in such concentration that the inland seas begin to resemble permanent hunting territories rather than temporary migration routes. These animals did not drift through occasionally. They inhabited the warm oceans continuously, their long necks moving slowly through crowded ecosystems shaped around patience, precision, and quiet approach beneath the surface waters. In a museum in western Kansas, enclosed within pale stone that was once seafloor mud, a predator still carries its final meal inside its body. The skeleton belongs to Xiphictinus audex, a giant bony fish that ruled the upper waters of the inland sea. Curved within its rib cage lies another fish almost half its own length, preserved so completely that scales, fins, and vertebrae remain recognizable after tens of millions of years. Predator and prey fossilized together in a single moment of catastrophic excess. The specimen became known as the fish within a fish. The hunter measured roughly 4.2 meters long, while the swallowed Gillicus inside it stretched approximately 1.8 meters. The prey appears to have been consumed nearly whole. Many paleontologists suspect the enormous meal ruptured internal organs during swallowing or digestion, killing the predator shortly afterward before decomposition or scavengers could disturb the body. It remains one of the most vivid fossil records of behavior ever discovered from the warm seas. Xiphoctinus itself could grow to roughly 6 meters in total length. Despite its appearance, it was not closely related to sharks. It belonged to a lineage of large, predatory bony fish more closely connected to modern tarpon and other ray-finned fishes. Its body was long, muscular, and streamlined for rapid acceleration near the surface waters where dense schools of prey gathered beneath sunlight. Its jaws carried one of the most distinctive feeding structures in the Cretaceous Ocean. The teeth projected forward at sharp angles like rows of polished spikes. Rather than slicing flesh apart, they functioned primarily to impale and trap prey during high-speed attacks. A fish struck by those jaws would have been pinned instantly against inward-pointing teeth before being swallowed whole or in massive sections. The skull itself opened extraordinarily wide relative to body size, allowing Xiphictinus to consume prey that seems impossibly large even by modern standards. Muscle attachment scars, preserved along the skeleton, indicate tremendous swimming power, concentrated through the tail and rear body. Biomechanical estimates suggest burst speeds exceeding 10 meters per second, placing it among the fastest large predatory fish known from the fossil record. Much of its existence may have consisted of violent acceleration, followed by equally violent collision. Several specimens preserve broken vertebrae, fractured ribs, and puncture wounds healed during life, evidence of repeated high-energy impacts, either with prey, rivals, or both. The ecology of Xiphictinus appears different from the solitary ambush strategies used by many marine reptiles. Fossil abundance patterns and body structure suggest these fish may have hunted in loose aggregations near the surface, exploiting immense concentrations of smaller fish through coordinated bursts of speed. Some researchers compare their ecological role to an amplified combination of modern tuna and barracuda, operating at scales far beyond most modern pelagic predators. Their world rewarded aggression, speed, and relentless feeding. Yet that specialization came with remarkable fragility once conditions changed. When the extinction event arrived 66 million years ago, the lineage vanished completely. No descendant persisted in reduced form. No smaller surviving branch adapted to colder oceans or altered food webs. Xiphactinus had become so precisely shaped for the warm inland seas that when those seas disappeared, the evolutionary structure supporting the animal disappeared with them. Only the fossils remained, carrying frozen evidence of a predator that could consume prey nearly half its own size and still continue hunting through the crowded waters above the ancient continent. Above the crowded inland waters, where fish schools flashed beneath the surface and marine reptiles moved through the depths below, another layer of the ecosystem remained in constant motion. Large shadows drifted across the sea floor far beneath them, wings tilting gently against warm rising air. The pterosaurs occupied this upper world with bodies so improbable that even modern aerodynamics struggled for decades to explain how some of them ever became airborne at all. Among the largest was Quetzalcoatlus northropi, an animal with a wingspan reaching roughly 10 to 11 meters, comparable to a small aircraft. Yet, despite that immense width, estimates place its weight at only 200 to 250 kilograms. The achievement depended on extraordinary skeletal engineering. Its bones were hollow, thin-walled, and reinforced internally by delicate struts arranged like the supports within a bridge. Strength emerged not from heaviness, but from geometry, allowing the skeleton to remain both rigid and remarkably light. When standing on land, Quetzalcoatlus rose to approximately the height of a giraffe, its folded wings tucked alongside long forelimbs, while the neck lifted the narrow skull high above the ground. For much of the 20th century, many researchers doubted that such an animal could fly under its own power. The proportions appeared too extreme, the wings too vast, the launch requirements too demanding for muscle alone to overcome gravity. Biomechanical modeling published in 2021 helped resolve the problem. Rather than leaping upward like a bird, Quetzalcoatlus likely launched using all four limbs simultaneously in a powerful quadrupedal motion. The forelimbs, enormously muscular and built around elongated wing bones, acted almost like spring-loaded catapults. Once airborne, the animal could transition into soaring flight at estimated cruising speeds near 130 kilometers per hour while reaching altitudes of roughly 4,600 meters. The atmosphere of the warm world played a critical role in making such flight possible. Intense heating across vast marine surfaces generated strong convective thermals, rising columns of warm air capable of supporting enormous gliding animals with minimal energy expenditure. Quetzalcoatlus and related species likely traveled immense distances by circling within these invisible air currents, crossing coastlines and inland seas while expending remarkably little metabolic effort once airborne. The modern ocean still produces thermals, but colder global conditions limit their consistency and strength. The greenhouse atmosphere of the warm era created a sky more supportive of giant, soaring animals than the present Earth provides. Smaller relatives filled the air in greater numbers. Pteranodon, with wingspans between 5 and 6 meters, appears abundantly throughout Kansas fossil deposits. Hundreds of specimens suggest dense populations living along the margins of the inland sea, perhaps gathering in colonies resembling modern seabird rookeries stretched across coastal cliffs and shallow shorelines. Their long beaks and lightweight skulls were suited for capturing smaller surface fish near open water, feeding within a different ecological layer than the giant marine predators beneath them. The Terasaurs did not dominate the ocean itself. Instead, they occupied the moving boundary between sea and sky, feeding from the same immense productivity while rarely competing directly with mosasaurs or giant fish. Their success depended on warm air, stable, soaring conditions, and ecosystems dense enough to support constant aerial movement across enormous ranges. When the extinction arrived, every pterosaur lineage disappeared completely. During the 66 million years since, birds diversified into countless forms, yet none have returned to the scale achieved by those great soaring reptiles. The atmosphere that once carried them so easily no longer exists in the same way, and the skies above the modern ocean remain emptier for their absence. Not every survivor of the warm world ruled it. Some endured by remaining adaptable enough to live beneath larger powers without depending entirely upon them. Through the crowded marine ecosystems of the late Cretaceous, sharks occupied that quieter position. They hunted constantly, left scars on enormous prey, and moved through nearly every level of the food web, yet they rarely stood at its absolute peak. Among the most formidable was Cretoxorina mantelli, often called the Ginsu shark because of its blade-shaped teeth. It reached roughly 6 to 7 meters in length and possessed a body built for powerful, sustained swimming through open water. Fossilized vertebrae from marine reptiles preserve deep cuts matching its teeth, including injuries found on mosasaurs and plesiosaurs. These sharks were active predators, fully capable of attacking large animals, scavenging carcasses, or competing aggressively for food within the inland seas. Even so, they existed alongside marine reptiles that occupied higher predatory positions. Mosasaurs grew larger, struck with greater force, and diversified into more specialized ecological roles. Giant bony fish accelerated through surface waters in explosive bursts. Pliosaurs commanded deep offshore regions with skulls capable of crushing almost anything they seized. The warm ocean supported several overlapping dynasties at once, and sharks formed part of that system without entirely controlling it. Then the system vanished. The mosasaurs disappeared completely. The pliosaurs vanished. The giant fish vanished. Entire reptilian lineages that had dominated the oceans for millions of years ended within the extinction boundary and never returned. Yet sharks remained. Modern oceans still contain bodies recognizably similar to those moving through ancient seas hundreds of millions of years ago. The shark design itself is extraordinarily old. Sharks existed long before the warm era began, their ancestry extending back more than 450 million years. Their skeletons, composed primarily of cartilage rather than dense bone, changed gradually across immense spans of time while preserving the same fundamental architecture: streamlined bodies, replaceable teeth, flexible feeding behavior, and efficient movement through water. They survived multiple global catastrophes, not by becoming the single most specialized organism in the ocean, but by avoiding dependence on one narrow ecological strategy. When food becomes scarce, many sharks can reduce metabolic demand dramatically. Some species tolerate warm tropical seas, others drift through near freezing water. Their diets range widely from fish and squid to carrion and crustaceans. This flexibility becomes almost invisible during stable periods dominated by specialized giants, yet it turns crucial when ecosystems collapse suddenly. After the extinction disrupted marine food chains, the enormous predators dependent on constant abundance disappeared first. Animals built around immense energy requirements could not sustain themselves through darkness, cooling oceans, and collapsing prey populations. Sharks persisted partly because they required less precision from the world around them. They could slow down, wait, and survive inside simplified ecosystems while more specialized hunters vanished. There is something quietly revealing in that contrast. A mosasaur lineage dominated warm seas for roughly 30 million years before ending entirely. Sharks endured by never fully committing themselves to a single environmental state or ecological role. Magnificence and longevity followed different evolutionary paths through deep time, and the history of the ocean preserved room for both. Even now, modern sharks carry traces of those vanished worlds within their anatomy. Their ancestors moved beneath the same greenhouse skies, through the same ancient currents, while giant reptiles rose, flourished, and disappeared around them. The sharks simply continued swimming onward through each transition, patient enough to outlast entire dynasties. Far from the inland seas, beyond the shorelines where marine reptiles surfaced beneath warm skies, the continents themselves had become biological engines, operating at a scale difficult to compare with the modern Earth. The same atmospheric conditions heating the oceans were reshaping every forest, river basin, and floodplain across the planet. Carbon dioxide concentrations many times higher than today altered the chemistry of growth itself, feeding landscapes that rarely experienced interruption from cold or drought. Forests spread across immense distances in layered expanses of ferns, towering conifers, cycads, and early flowering plants. Growth seasons did not collapse into winter dormancy. Leaves did not vanish across entire continents each year. Plant tissue continued developing month after month beneath stable warmth and abundant rainfall. In many regions, the vegetation density would have appeared almost excessive by modern standards, with thick canopies above and heavy undergrowth below, all continuously converting sunlight and atmospheric carbon into living mass. That uninterrupted productivity supported herbivores of astonishing scale. Patagotitan majorum, currently the largest confirmed dinosaur, stretched roughly 37 meters in length and weighed close to 69 tons. The animal moved on column-like limbs beneath a neck that swept slowly across vast feeding ranges, consuming enormous quantities of vegetation every day. Such body size required ecosystems capable of replacing consumed plant matter continuously across years and decades. The greenhouse world supplied that energy with remarkable consistency. Even the predators reflected the unusual blending of terrestrial and aquatic abundance. Spinosaurus aegypticus, reaching approximately 14 to 15 meters in length, spent much of its life within broad river systems flowing through what is now North Africa. Its elongated jaws, dense limb bones, and paddle-shaped tail suggest an animal adapted partly for hunting within water while still moving along shorelines and floodplains. It existed at the meeting point between river and land, feeding within environments where fish populations, wetlands, and forest productivity overlapped into a single interconnected system. Those river systems carried enormous nutrient loads from the continents into coastal waters and inland seas. Rainfall washed organic material, sediment, and dissolved minerals downstream continuously, enriching marine ecosystems already thriving beneath greenhouse temperatures. Productivity on land amplified productivity in the sea, while warm oceans returned moisture to the atmosphere through evaporation, feeding rainfall back across the continents in an immense planetary cycle of biological exchange. The atmosphere itself behaved differently under these conditions. Modern Earth relies on sharp temperature contrasts between equator and poles to drive powerful jet streams, polar vortices, and large seasonal weather systems. During the warm era, those contrasts weakened dramatically because the poles remained relatively mild year-round. Without extreme thermal gradients, global circulation patterns softened into something more stable and less violent than the climate systems shaping the present world. Rain fell more evenly across many regions rather than concentrating into severe seasonal extremes. Some deserts still existed, yet broad portions of the planet maintained sustained humidity over immense timescales. Wetlands expanded, river deltas spread outward, and forests reached into latitudes that today support snow and ice for much of the year. The continents became continuous reservoirs of organic production, feeding directly into the warm seas. Every fern frond, every fallen branch, every river swollen with sediment eventually joined the same planetary system, supporting giant reptiles, immense fish, and crowded marine food webs beneath greenhouse skies that endured for millions of years without interruption. Beneath the enormous predators of the warm ocean existed another dynasty, quieter in movement, yet vastly more numerous, drifting through the water in spiraled shells that repeated across the seas in endless variation. The ammonites formed the living foundation beneath almost every major hunter of the era. Their shells appear throughout the sedimentary record in such abundance that entire cliffs and limestone layers are built partly from the compacted remains of their bodies. They belong to the cephalopods, relatives of modern squid, octopus, and nautilus, though their appearance differed dramatically from the soft-bodied hunters familiar today. Most lived within tightly coiled external shells, ranging from only a few centimeters across to giants exceeding 1.8 meters in diameter. Among the largest known species, Parapuzotia sepenredensis may have weighed more than 1,400 kilograms in life. Its enormous spiral, drifting through warm marine waters, that supported invertebrate growth on extraordinary scales. The shell itself was a remarkable structure. Inside the spiral, thin walls called septa divided the shell into separate chambers filled partly with gas. By adjusting fluid and gas balance within these chambers, the ammonite could control buoyancy with delicate precision, rising or sinking through the water column without constant swimming effort. The design proved so effective that variations of it persisted for roughly 300 million years with relatively little fundamental alteration. Their abundance transformed entire ecosystems. In some formations, ammonite shells accumulate by the millions within single outcrops several meters thick, packed together in dense fossil layers like drifting snowfall preserved in stone. Such numbers imply oceans saturated with cephalopod life across immense geographic ranges. They occupied nearly every marine niche simultaneously. Some species darted rapidly near the surface as active predators. Others hovered slowly through mid-water depths, while still others lived close to the seafloor, scavenging or feeding in darker regions beneath the productive upper layers. Because ammonites existed at so many ecological levels at once, nearly every large predator consumed them. Mosasaur tooth marks appear pressed into shattered shells. Plesiosaur stomach contents preserve fragments of ammonite remains polished by digestion. Giant predatory fish swallowed them alongside smaller prey. Even animals specialized for crushing shellfish evolved teeth adapted specifically for breaking through their calcium carbonate armor. The entire warm ocean fed upon them directly or indirectly. Their shells also influenced the chemistry of the sea itself. As ammonites died in immense numbers, their sinking remains carried carbon and minerals downward into marine sediments, helping shape nutrient cycles across shallow seas and deeper basins alike. Their biological success became woven into the structure of the ecosystem so thoroughly that the predators above them depended upon a constant supply of ammonite biomass to sustain large populations. Then, at the extinction boundary 66 million years ago, the entire group vanished. Every ammonite lineage ended simultaneously. Not a single confirmed descendant crossed into the world that followed. Yet the nautilus, another shelled cephalopod with surprisingly similar buoyancy mechanics and broadly comparable ecology, survived the catastrophe and continues drifting through modern oceans today. No explanation fully resolves that contrast. Researchers have proposed differences in reproduction, metabolism, larval development, and habitat depth, but no single theory accounts for the complete disappearance of one group beside the survival of the other. The ammonites left behind not only empty shells, but a sudden vacancy within the food web itself. When they disappeared, the nutritional foundation supporting the warm ocean's immense predator hierarchy disappeared with them, leaving the great marine dynasties suspended above an absence that could no longer sustain their world. There came a point during the age of warm oceans when the planet drifted close to the upper boundary complex life could tolerate. The seas had already remained ice-free for millions of years, forests already stretched into polar regions, and giant reptiles already crossed waters heated far beyond modern conditions. Then the temperature climbed further still. Around 90 million years ago, Earth entered what scientists now call the Cretaceous thermal maximum, the hottest sustained interval known from at least the last 500 million years. Global average temperatures rose to roughly 35 degrees Celsius. Modern Earth averages closer to 15. In equatorial regions, shallow sea surface temperatures approached 42 degrees Celsius, only a few degrees below the threshold where proteins within living cells begin losing structural stability. Water that warm carries less dissolved oxygen while simultaneously accelerating metabolism, forcing marine organisms to consume more oxygen precisely when less becomes available. The trigger lay beneath the Caribbean region, where an immense volcanic episode reshaped large sections of the seafloor. The Caribbean Large Igneous Province released extraordinary volumes of lava across millions of years, injecting enormous quantities of carbon dioxide and volcanic gases into the atmosphere. These eruptions did not resemble isolated volcanic mountains briefly exploding before falling silent. They formed prolonged planetary scale outpourings, covering huge marine areas beneath molten rock while altering ocean chemistry and atmospheric composition simultaneously. As temperatures climbed, portions of the ocean entered recurring periods now called oceanic anoxic events. In these intervals, deep and mid-level waters lost most or all dissolved oxygen. Marine organisms, sinking after death, accumulated on the seafloor faster than decomposition, could fully process them under oxygen poor conditions, creating dark organic rich sediments that later hardened into black shale. Today, those ancient layers remain visible in geological cores extracted across the world, and many became the petroleum source rocks eventually transformed into oil and gas deposits. The biological consequences varied dramatically by depth. Deep marine ecosystems suffered severe losses during repeated oxygen collapses, particularly among slower-moving organisms unable to escape depleted waters. Yet the giant animals inhabiting shallow seas appear to have endured with surprising resilience. Mosasaurs, plesiosaurs, and enormous predatory fish continued thriving across many regions without clear evidence of catastrophic extinction during the thermal maximum itself. Part of that resilience may have come from physiology already shaped by environmental instability. Isotopic evidence suggests several marine reptile groups regulated internal body temperatures independently from surrounding water. Warm-blooded metabolism, efficient swimming systems, and the ability to travel vertically through different ocean layers may have allowed these animals to tolerate fluctuations that devastated less mobile species below them. Still, the thermal maximum altered the trajectory of the world permanently. After roughly 90 million years ago, temperatures began an almost imperceptibly slow decline. No living creature would have sensed the shift within a single lifespan. The cooling unfolded in fractions of a degree, spread across millions of years, subtle enough to remain invisible generation by generation, while accumulating steadily across geological time. Sea levels gradually retreated. Ocean circulation patterns shifted. Ecosystems built around uninterrupted greenhouse stability entered a long period of adjustment they would never fully complete. The warm world reached its greatest intensity during the thermal maximum, yet hidden inside that peak was the beginning of reversal. The planet had started moving, slowly and unevenly, toward colder conditions that the giants of the greenhouse Earth had never needed to survive before. The warm ocean did not function as a simple chain of hunter and prey. It resembled a vast, layered structure, extending from microscopic drifting organisms near the sunlit surface to giant predators crossing separate ecological territories far below. Modern paleontology has reconstructed much of this hierarchy not through imagination, but through chemistry preserved in teeth, fossilized stomach contents, healed bite wounds, and isotopic signatures embedded within bone. At the foundation drifted immense blooms of phytoplankton. These microscopic organisms floated through shallow, warm seas, flooded with sunlight, and nutrients washed continuously from productive continents. They converted carbon dioxide into organic matter at extraordinary rates, generating far more biological energy per square kilometer than most modern marine systems. Entire ecosystems rested upon this invisible layer of suspended life. Above them existed vast populations of consumers, transforming plant productivity into animal biomass. Ammonites moved through the water column in enormous numbers beside smaller fish, crustaceans, shelled invertebrates, and filter-feeding organisms. This middle layer acted as the nutritional engine supporting everything higher in the system. Fossil deposits suggest prey densities so immense that predator populations could remain unusually concentrated without exhausting available food. The first major hunters occupied the next tier upward. Smaller mosasaurs between roughly 1 and 5 meters hunted fish and cephalopods through coastal waters. Medium-sized sharks, including Cretaceous, moved between ecological zones, feeding opportunistically wherever prey accumulated. Smaller plesiosaurs pursued agile prey through open water, while large bony fish patrolled regions too crowded for slower ambush strategies. These predators frequently overlapped, competing and feeding within the same broad environments without fully dominating them. Higher still came the giant pursuit hunters. Zephactinus and other enormous predatory fish accelerated through surface waters in violent bursts of speed. Larger mosasaurs, reaching 8 to 12 meters, consumed increasingly diverse prey, including sharks, marine reptiles, and shell-bearing animals. Medium pliosaurs occupied deeper offshore regions where visibility declined and pressure increased. Bite marks preserved across fossil bones reveal constant interaction between these upper predators, including scavenging, territorial conflict, and direct predation. At the top stood only a handful of animals. The largest mosasaurs, including Mosasaurus hoffmanii and Tylosaurus proriger, occupied the apex of shallow inland seas. In more open marine environments, giant pliosaurs, such as Pliosaurus funke, filled a parallel role. Nitrogen isotope analysis provides the clearest evidence for their position. With each step upward in a food web, heavier nitrogen isotopes accumulate within body tissues. The highest ratios found in these marine ecosystems consistently belong to the giant apex reptiles, placing them above every other major predator, chemically as well as physically. Yet, the most revealing discovery may be that the warm ocean supported multiple apex systems simultaneously. Isotopic comparisons show inland seas dominated by mosasaurs, operated partly separately from deeper offshore ecosystems where pliosaurs remained dominant. Rather than a single, unified hierarchy, the ocean contained overlapping ecological provinces large enough to sustain distinct predatory dynasties within different regions of the same world ocean. Sharks moved through nearly all of these levels without permanently occupying the highest one. Their fossils appear across a remarkable range of trophic positions, evidence of extraordinary ecological flexibility. They hunted smaller prey, scavenged carcasses, attacked weakened reptiles, and survived within niches too varied for specialized giants to exploit consistently. The resulting food web was not merely larger than modern marine ecosystems. It possessed greater layering, denser biological exchange, and more specialized interactions unfolding simultaneously across immense warm seas that sustained complexity on a planetary scale. In the modern world, nearly every ecosystem pulses to the rhythm of scarcity. Migrations begin as temperatures fall. Breeding seasons compress into narrow windows before food disappears. Juveniles race against approaching winters they have never experienced before. Across oceans and continents, survival is tied to timing. For most of the warm era, that rhythm vanished. The great marine reptiles lived in a world where cold seasons never arrived to interrupt reproduction. Fossil evidence from ichthyosaurs preserves this most clearly. Multiple specimens have been recovered containing embryos inside the body cavity, some frozen in the act of birth itself. The young emerge tail first, precisely the strategy used by modern dolphins to prevent drowning during delivery. These animals never return to beaches or shorelines. Birth occurred directly in open water, fully integrated into a permanent marine existence, because environmental conditions remained comparatively stable year-round. Reproduction no longer depended on narrow seasonal opportunities. There was no urgent annual window during which temperatures briefly became survivable for newborns. Calves could be born in any month beneath any phase of the sky into oceans where food webs remained continuously active. Evidence suggests mosasaurs reached the same solution independently. In 2020, researchers studying a small mosasaur specimen recovered from Antarctica identified anatomical features strongly consistent with live birth in open water. Even near the polar regions of the warm world, there were no permanent ice sheets, no frozen coastlines, and no lethal breeding seasons. The oceans remained navigable from equator to pole. The disappearance of winter transformed juvenile survival rates in ways difficult to imagine within modern ecosystems. Today, the first year of life is often the deadliest period for large animals. Young creatures encounter starvation, sudden cold, migration failure, and collapsing food supplies before reaching maturity. In the warm world, many of these pressures simply did not exist. Food remained available continuously, temperatures remained relatively stable, and shallow seas retained biological productivity across the calendar year. The demographic consequences would have reshaped entire populations. Modern ecosystems are usually dominated numerically by younger animals because harsh seasonal conditions constantly remove the old, the weak, and the inexperienced. In contrast, the warm oceans may have supported unusually high proportions of mature adults. Many giant marine reptiles likely survived for decades without enduring repeated seasonal collapses in prey availability. Bone histology supports this picture. The largest mosasaur specimens, some reaching 15 to 17 meters, preserve uninterrupted growth signatures extending across estimated lifespans of 40 to 50 years. These animals did not repeatedly pause development during winters. Growth continued gradually and continuously across decades of stable environmental conditions. An ocean populated by large numbers of older individuals would not merely look different physically. Behavior itself changes in long-lived populations. Older predators accumulate spatial memory, hunting experience, territorial familiarity, and learned behavioral patterns unavailable to younger populations dominated by rapid turnover. Ecological pressure becomes more stable, more deliberate, and more persistent when apex animals survive for decades instead of years. The warm world therefore altered life history at every level simultaneously. It changed not only body size and metabolism, but survival curves, population age structure, reproductive timing, and behavioral continuity across generations. The seas were inhabited not merely by giant animals, but by communities weighted toward age, experience, and prolonged biological permanence, unlike anything surviving in the modern ocean. Far beneath the movements of predators and the drifting forests of plankton, the warm ocean carried a chemistry unlike anything circulating through modern seas. The difference was not visible from the surface. A traveler crossing those ancient waters might have noticed only endless warmth and unusual stillness. Yet, dissolved within the water itself was an entirely different planetary system, one that shaped every shell, every bone, and every breath taken beneath the waves. The atmosphere above the ocean contained carbon dioxide concentrations several times higher than modern levels. The sea absorbed enormous amounts of this gas continuously, altering the chemistry of seawater across the globe. On average, the ocean became more acidic than today. Under modern conditions, such acidity often weakens shell formation. Yet, the shallow continental seas of the warm era behaved differently because warmth accelerated chemical cycling while flooded continental margins supplied immense quantities of dissolved minerals into coastal waters. These shallow regions became saturated with carbonate ions, the raw material required for shells and skeletons, ammonites, mollusks, and countless marine invertebrates flourished within this balance. Shell production reached such extraordinary levels that entire rock formations later formed from compressed accumulations of their remains. The sea did not merely support shell building, it chemically encouraged it on continental scales. The deep ocean operated under very different conditions. During periodic oceanic anoxic events, vast regions of deeper water lost dissolved oxygen almost completely. Organic matter drifting downward from the productive surface accumulated faster than decomposition could process it. Thick black sediments spread across the seafloor, rich in carbon and nearly devoid of oxygen-dependent life. These dark layers still exist today inside geological cores recovered from ancient seabeds, silent records of oceans that once suffocated from below. Yet even this apparent collapse fed the surface world above. Nutrients released during deep water die-offs slowly returned upward through circulation and upwelling, enriching the shallow seas with phosphorus, nitrogen, and trace elements. Each pulse of deep stagnation ultimately fertilized the sunlit layers where ammonites multiplied and predators hunted. Ocean circulation itself moved differently through this greenhouse world. Modern oceans depend heavily on cold polar waters sinking toward the abyss, dragging oxygen and nutrients through a vast global conveyor system. In the warm era, permanent polar ice scarcely existed. Without dense freezing water descending from the poles, circulation slowed dramatically. Heat remained trapped within the upper ocean for longer periods, smoothing seasonal variation and preserving the stable thermal conditions that large marine reptiles depended upon. Salinity patterns also shifted. High sea levels drowned continental interiors, creating immense inland seas partially isolated from the open ocean. Rivers flowing from heavily vegetated continents diluted these basins continuously. Fossil evidence shows some inland waters possessed measurably lower salinity than surrounding oceans, producing chemically distinct habitats connected within the same planetary sea. Scientists now read much of this vanished chemistry directly from fossil teeth. Oxygen isotope ratios preserved within enamel record ancient water temperatures with remarkable precision, often within 1 or 2 degrees Celsius. The same isotopic signatures reveal something even stranger. Many marine reptiles preserved body temperatures consistently warmer than the water surrounding them. Independent chemical confirmation that warm-blooded metabolisms evolved repeatedly within these oceans. Nothing comparable could emerge simply by heating the modern world. The continents themselves stood in different positions. Volcanic systems released carbon differently, circulation patterns followed other pathways, and the living communities shaping the chemistry no longer exist. The warm ocean belonged entirely to its own vanished Earth. Long after the inland seas vanished and their predators dissolved into stone, the evidence remained hidden beneath quiet grasslands and dry sedimentary cliffs. Western Kansas, now distant from any ocean, preserves one of the richest marine fossil archives on Earth. The Niobrara chalk, deposited slowly on the floor of the western interior Seaway, accumulated layer upon layer of microscopic plankton, remains across millions of years. Within those pale sediments lie entire ecosystems, suspended in extraordinary detail. The density of fossils recovered there transformed understanding of the warm world from scattered speculation into something closer to ecological reconstruction. Mosasaurs, plesiosaurs, giant fish, turtles, sharks, pterosaurs, ammonites, and delicate schooling fish appear together within the same formations, often preserved closely enough to reveal relationships between predator and prey. Modern imaging techniques changed the field further. CT scanning now allows researchers to examine the interiors of fossil skulls without damaging the specimens themselves. Hidden cavities inside mosasaur skulls revealed the shape of the brain, the arrangement of sensory organs, and the structure of the inner ear. These scans showed adaptations for detecting low-frequency vibrations moving through water, similar to pressure-sensing systems seen in modern crocodilians. The animals could perceive distant movement long before it became visible. Other discoveries emerged from slices of bone thinner than paper. Under microscopes, fossil bone tissue preserves microscopic growth rings similar to those inside trees. Bone histology made it possible to estimate age, growth rate, and seasonal stress. In many warm-era reptiles, the expected annual slowdown associated with winter never appears. Growth continued with remarkable consistency across decades, direct evidence that these oceans lacked the seasonal interruptions shaping modern marine life. Some fossils preserve even softer traces. Fine-grained sediments occasionally captured impressions of skin before decay erased them. In rare cases, pigment-bearing structures called melanosomes survived fossilization, preserving hints of original color patterns. Other specimens contain stomach contents compressed into recognizable masses of bone, shell, and scales. The famous Gifactinus fossil, containing another fish inside its body cavity, is not an artistic reconstruction. It is a literal preserved moment of predation. One of the most important revisions arrived in 2013 through a mosasaur fossil preserving phosphatized soft tissue. During fossilization, calcium phosphate minerals replaced decaying tissue quickly enough to preserve the three-dimensional outline of the tail. Until then, scientists assumed mosasaurs swam with long, undulating bodies like crocodiles. The fossil revealed a crescent-shaped tail fluke instead, transforming biomechanical understanding of how these predators moved through open water. Chemistry added another layer to the reconstruction. Isotopic analysis of fossil tooth enamel allows scientists to measure ancient water temperatures, trophic position within the food web, and metabolic patterns simultaneously. Oxygen isotopes record the temperature of surrounding seawater. Nitrogen isotopes reveal feeding level within the ecosystem. Carbon signatures preserve details about habitat and prey sources. A single tooth can quietly contain an entire environmental history. Even now, the picture continues shifting. Evidence for warm-blooded plesiosaurs emerged only in the early 2020s. New giant ichthyosaur material still appears from British Columbia. Each discovery alters the outline slightly, refining a vanished ocean reconstructed not from imagination, but from chemistry, anatomy, sediment, and stone. Nothing in the warm world announced its ending. The oceans still shimmered beneath broad sunlight. Giant predators still crossed the inland seas. Forests still spread across polar regions where ice had not existed for tens of millions of years. To anything alive at the time, the planet likely appeared permanent. Yet deep beneath those stable surfaces, the balance had already begun to shift. Around 70 million years ago, global temperatures started a slow decline measurable today only through chemistry locked inside ancient rock and fossil enamel. The change was almost impossibly gradual, fractions of a degree across spans longer than entire mammalian histories. No individual creature could have sensed it unfolding. Still, over geological time, those tiny losses accumulated. The first traces of polar ice began returning to the planet. As more water became trapped near the poles, global sea levels slowly fell. Across North America, the western interior Seaway began retreating from the edges of the continent that it had drowned for millions of years. Shorelines migrated steadily outward. Waters that had once covered immense distances became shallower and narrower. Productive marine habitat contracted generation by generation. The change mattered because the warm world's abundance depended heavily on shallow seas, flooded with sunlight and nutrients. As those regions shrank, the enormous food web layered above them began losing stability from its foundation upward. The ammonites reveal this decline with unusual clarity. Because they were so abundant and fossilized so readily, their diversity acts almost like a pulse reading for the ecosystem itself. Earlier deposits preserve hundreds of species, occupying different depths, diets, and ecological roles. In the final 2 million years before the extinction boundary, that diversity collapses dramatically. Entire branches vanish from the fossil record, leaving only a fraction of the former abundance. The largest pliosaurs disappear before the asteroid as well. Giant apex hunters, comparable to Pliosaurus funki, become increasingly rare in late Cretaceous deposits. Surviving relatives appear smaller and less diverse. The reasons remain uncertain, though declining prey availability and shrinking marine habitats likely contributed. The open ocean still held predators of immense scale, but the earlier dynasties had begun thinning. Then another destabilizing force emerged. Around 66.5 million years ago, the Deccan Traps eruptions began in what is now India. Lava flooded across the landscape in repeated pulses, eventually covering an area comparable to modern India itself. These eruptions released enormous quantities of carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere. Instead of restoring the old greenhouse equilibrium, the gases produced rapid climatic oscillations. Cooling phases triggered by sulfur aerosols alternated with warming phases driven by carbon dioxide accumulation. The long, stable climate that had sustained the warm world for tens of millions of years became increasingly erratic. Marine ecosystems built around continuity struggled under these fluctuations. Inland seas continued shrinking, food webs fragmented further, ammonites dwindled. Some giant predators vanished entirely, while others persisted in reduced numbers. By the final million years of the Cretaceous, the warm world was no longer at its peak. The great ecosystem still existed, immense and alive, but its resilience had weakened. The asteroid that arrived later did not strike a thriving eternal kingdom. It struck an ancient world already entering decline, where the first quiet return of winter had already begun reshaping the earth beneath the notice of everything living upon it. It began with a stone falling faster than sound could move through air. Roughly 66 million years ago, an asteroid between 10 and 15 kilometers wide approached Earth at approximately 20 kilometers per second. In less time than a human breath, it struck the shallow tropical sea covering what is now the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico. The object itself vanished almost instantly, converted into heat, pressure, and expanding plasma at the moment of impact. The location mattered as much as the impact itself. Beneath the shallow water lay enormous deposits of carbonate and sulfate-rich rock. Instead of merely excavating a crater, the collision vaporized billions of tons of sulfur-bearing material directly into the upper atmosphere. Had the asteroid struck a deeper ocean basin or a region of different geology, many more ecosystems might have endured. Here, the chemistry of the crust amplified the catastrophe far beyond the initial explosion. The released energy approached 100 million megatons, roughly a billion times greater than the Hiroshima detonation. A crater 180 kilometers wide formed in under 2 minutes. Rock near the impact site behaved briefly like liquid. Entire sections of crust collapsed inward, while others were thrown beyond the atmosphere. Within minutes, a fireball expanded outward at hypersonic speed. Tsunamis, hundreds of meters high, spread through surrounding seas, racing across coastlines and deep into continental interiors. Seismic waves propagated through the crust with such force that they triggered earthquakes on a scale unmatched elsewhere in the geological record. Yet the most devastating phase arrived from above. Material blasted into space began falling back through the atmosphere across the entire planet. Tiny fragments of molten rock re-entered at enormous velocity, converting kinetic energy into radiant heat. For hours, much of the sky itself glowed. Forests ignited, not primarily from the blast wave, but from thermal radiation descending through the atmosphere. Vast regions of the northern hemisphere burned beneath falling debris. Then came the darkness. Sulfur aerosols combined with soot from global fires and spread through the stratosphere, reflecting sunlight back into space. Photosynthesis collapsed across land and sea. Surface temperatures dropped with astonishing speed, perhaps 26 degrees Celsius within the first year. Oceans that had remained warm and biologically dense for tens of millions of years entered abrupt cooling beneath dimmed skies. For the giant marine reptiles and airborne predators of the warm world, the disaster was not merely destructive. It inverted every condition their biology depended upon simultaneously. Food chains built upon abundant sunlight failed almost immediately. Warm, stable seas became colder and increasingly empty. Prey disappeared. Migration patterns collapsed. Reproduction failed. Mosasaurs, plesiosaurs, pterosaurs, giant fish, and ammonites vanish from the fossil record at this boundary with startling precision. Around the world, geologists find a thin clay layer enriched with iridium, an element rare within Earth's crust but abundant in asteroids. Beneath that layer lie the fossils of the warm world. Above it lies a quieter planet already beginning to resemble the modern Earth. The boundary is astonishingly narrow. A few centimeters of sediment separate two entirely different biological worlds, one filled with giant reptiles beneath warm inland seas, the other beginning again beneath colder skies and returning winter. After the boundary layer settled onto the silent oceans and darkened forests, survival did not unfold as a lottery. The fossil record reveals a pattern so consistent that it appears almost mathematical, a sorting process governed less by strength than by flexibility. The warm world had favored animals built for abundance. Its greatest predators depended on dense food webs, stable temperatures, and uninterrupted biological productivity extending across entire oceans and continents. Mosasaurs, plesiosaurs, giant fish, pterosaurs, ammonites, and the non-avian dinosaurs all occupied ecological systems that functioned only while energy remained continuously available. Their bodies burned too brightly for famine. When sunlight vanished and temperatures collapsed, those strategies failed together. The survivors belonged to a different category of life entirely. Small size became an advantage because smaller animals required less food to remain alive. Flexible metabolism became more valuable than speed or power. Omnivory mattered more than precision hunting. The creatures that endured were those capable of slowing down, hiding, scavenging, waiting, or feeding on whatever fragments of the ecosystem remained functional. Crocodilians crossed the extinction boundary with surprisingly little anatomical change. Even before the impact, their physiology operated according to a slower rhythm than the giant marine reptiles surrounding them. A crocodilian can reduce its metabolic demand to extraordinarily low levels and survive without eating for more than a year. Fish, carrion, small vertebrates, fruit, almost anything organic could become food when necessary. In a collapsing world, that flexibility mattered more than dominance. Turtles carried similar advantages through the catastrophe. Smaller relatives of creatures like Archelon survived because they tolerated dormancy well and demanded relatively little energy. Their bodies were adapted not for constant activity, but for endurance. Rivers, estuaries, and muddy freshwater systems may also have buffered them from some of the worst disruptions unfolding in the open oceans. Sharks persisted through the extinction using the same strategy that had already carried them across earlier planetary crises. They occupied many levels of the food web simultaneously, feeding opportunistically rather than depending upon a single prey source. Some species scavenged, others hunted small surviving fish. Their reproductive and metabolic diversity gave them multiple paths through environmental collapse, while more specialized predators possessed only one. Small mammals emerged from the extinction with traits that suddenly became powerful advantages: fur insulated against the sharp cooling. Burrowing behaviors protected many species from surface fires and atmospheric chaos. Seeds, insects, roots, and decaying matter remained available long after larger food chains collapsed. Mammals also reproduced quickly, allowing populations to recover even after severe losses. The surviving birds represented a similarly narrow category. The gigantic pterosaurs disappeared completely, but small avian dinosaurs endured because they were lightweight, adaptable, and capable of rapid dispersal across damaged landscapes. Omnivorous feeding habits allowed them to exploit scattered resources that larger aerial predators could never have survived upon. Again and again across deep time, the same principle appears beneath different extinctions. Specialization creates magnificence during stable ages, but instability favors versatility. The survivors are rarely the largest or most imposing organisms in their world. More often, they are the ones capable of becoming less, slowing their needs until the planet becomes habitable again. For a long time after the boundary clay settled across the seafloor, the oceans carried the shape of catastrophe within their chemistry. The great marine ecosystems of the warm era had not merely lost their dominant animals, their internal structure had collapsed, layer by layer, leaving behind water that circulated differently, stored heat differently, and supported life at a far smaller scale. The first years after the impact brought a sharp planetary cooling unlike anything the warm world had experienced in tens of millions of years. Sea surface temperatures fell by approximately 7 to 8 degrees Celsius within a single decade. Sunlight returned gradually as atmospheric dust and sulfur aerosols settled out of the sky, yet the old conditions never fully recovered. The greenhouse equilibrium that had sustained the vast inland seas and continuously warm oceans was gone. The biological consequences unfolded unevenly across time. Phytoplankton, the microscopic drifting organisms forming the foundation of marine productivity, recovered comparatively quickly. Their reproductive cycles were rapid, and surviving populations expanded again within decades. Small invertebrates followed over the next centuries, reassembling the lower levels of the food web with surprising resilience. But the upper layers remained strangely vacant. For millions of years, the oceans contained fish, crustaceans, mollusks, and scattered predators. Yet nothing approached the immense ecological presence once held by mosasaurs, pliosaurs, and giant predatory fish. The architecture of gigantism had been dismantled. The warm, shallow seas that concentrated prey biomass no longer existed in the same form, and the colder oceans produced food chains organized around different energetic limits. The next major dynasty of marine giants emerged from an unexpected lineage. Not reptiles this time, but mammals. Around 53 million years ago, in river systems flowing through what is now Pakistan, a small hoofed mammal called Pachycetus moved cautiously through shallow water. It retained functional legs and still spent much of its life on land, yet its ear anatomy already carried the unmistakable signatures of early whale evolution. From that modest beginning, the cetaceans entered the sea. Their transformation unfolded with remarkable speed. Within roughly 15 million years, descendants of these river mammals had become fully oceanic. Hind limbs diminished, tails widened into flukes, nostrils migrated upward toward blowholes, and bodies lengthened into streamlined forms shaped once again by water. Evolution revisited familiar geometry through entirely different ancestry. The blue whale eventually surpassed every confirmed mosasaur in total mass, reaching lengths of up to 30 meters and weights approaching 170 tons. Yet its ecological role remained fundamentally different. It feeds by filtering tiny organisms from seawater rather than hunting large prey. The immense apex predators of the warm world never truly returned. Modern oceans still contain formidable hunters, orcas moving through polar currents, sperm whales descending into darkness, great white sharks patrolling continental shelves. Yet compared with the peak ecosystems of the ancient warm seas, the density of large predators is remarkably low. By geological standards, the oceans surrounding the modern world are unusually sparse places. What appears immense to us is already the reduced aftermath of a richer system, a quieter inheritance shaped by an extinction that permanently altered the limits of marine life. Much of the warm ocean remains hidden, not because the animals vanished completely, but because fossilization itself is selective. The ancient sea has preserved fragments unevenly, revealing certain coastlines and ecosystems in remarkable clarity, while leaving others almost entirely silent. The picture reconstructed so far is immense, yet still incomplete, assembled from scattered windows opened by geology and chance. Most of what is currently known about the warm marine world comes from North America and Europe. The chalk formations of Kansas, the marine sediments of Morocco, the Jurassic coasts of England, and Arctic deposits in Norway have yielded extraordinary concentrations of fossils because erosion exposed them at the surface where scientists could reach them. Entire ecosystems became visible simply because rock layers happened to rise, crack open, and survive long enough to be studied. Other oceans disappeared before they could tell their stories. The Tethys Ocean once stretched across much of the ancient planet, a vast tropical body of water occupying regions that now form the Himalayas, the Middle East, and southern Europe. During the warm era, it likely supported ecosystems equal to or greater than those reconstructed from the western interior Seaway. Yet when the Indian tectonic plate collided slowly with Asia, the ocean floor itself was crushed upward into mountain ranges. Sediments that once settled beneath warm, shallow seas now lie buried under thousands of meters of folded rock and stone. Much of that world became physically inaccessible. The deep ocean presents another absence. Fossilization occurs most readily in shallow environments where sediment accumulates rapidly and carcasses are buried before scavengers or currents destroy them. In the open deep sea, remains usually dissolve, scatter, or vanish into slowly accumulating sediments that rarely preserve complete skeletons. This means that almost everything known from the warm era represents coastal waters, inland seas, or upper ocean environments. Whatever hunted below roughly 500 meters remains largely invisible. Occasionally, the silence breaks in unexpected ways. Certain isolated vertebrae recovered from fragmentary deposits appear too large to belong to any currently described mosasaur species. Some suggest animals potentially exceeding 20 meters in length, larger than the biggest confirmed specimens presently recognized. Yet paleontology requires caution. Without more complete skeletons, these enormous bones remain hints rather than formal discoveries. The scientific picture continues shifting decade by decade. Predator X was formally described only in the early 2010s. The mosasaur tail fluke, now central to understanding their swimming mechanics, remained unknown until soft tissue preservation confirmed it in 2013. Giant ichthyosaur discoveries from British Columbia forced major revisions to body size estimates in the late 2010s, while chemical evidence confirming plesiosaur warm-bloodedness emerged only in the early 2020s. The warm world keeps changing as new evidence surfaces from stone. Even the animals already described represent only the fortunate fraction preserved under precisely suitable conditions, later exposed by erosion, then discovered by researchers working in the right place at the right moment. Entire predator lineages may have vanished without leaving a single identifiable skeleton behind. Somewhere beneath mountains, deserts, forests, and seabeds, the greater portion of that ocean still waits in darkness, its missing inhabitants carried silently inside rock that has not yet opened. The ancient warm ocean can feel impossibly distant, sealed behind layers of chalk, stone, and vanished continents. Yet the chemistry that shaped that world still operates today beneath modern skies and currents. Carbon dioxide continues to alter climate exactly as it did then. Oceans still absorb heat. Ice still governs sea level. The same planetary systems remain in motion, even though the world built around them has changed completely. Modern atmospheric carbon dioxide concentrations are now higher than at any point in at least 3 million years. Even so, they remain far below the levels sustained during the Great Warm Era, when concentrations reached roughly 4 to 8 times pre industrial values. Returning fully to those ancient conditions would require intervals of greenhouse accumulation lasting millions of years, driven by volcanic activity on scales with no modern equivalent. The comparison matters not because the present resembles that world completely, but because movement has begun in the same direction. The crucial distinction is speed. During the warm era, carbon dioxide accumulated gradually across immense spans of geological time. Ecosystems shifted continent by continent and generation by generation, adapting slowly as temperatures climbed. Forests migrated, oceans reorganized. Evolution kept pace because the changes unfolded over millions of years. The modern rise has occurred within centuries. In geological terms, the present transformation resembles a sudden shock rather than a slow transition. Coral reefs, fisheries, forests, migratory systems, and polar ecosystems are being asked to respond within lifetimes instead of evolutionary ages. The ancient warm world, therefore, cannot serve as a direct forecast for the next few centuries, yet it remains profoundly relevant because it reveals where prolonged greenhouse conditions eventually lead if sustained long enough. Certain patterns are already visible in quieter forms. Warm water marine species are expanding toward higher latitudes as currents and temperature bands shift poleward. Productive ocean layers are moving in depth and distribution. Regions that once supported dense marine life are changing chemically and thermally in ways that alter entire food webs from the microscopic level upward. The most dramatic ancient conditions remain far away on any human timescale. Polar forests will not suddenly return across the Arctic, nor will inland seas flood continents within centuries. Yet some feedback systems that intensified ancient warming are beginning to stir again. Permafrost across Siberia and other northern regions stores carbon reserves exceeding all cumulative industrial emissions produced by humanity so far. As frozen ground thaws, portions of that carbon may return gradually to the atmosphere, amplifying warming further. The ancient warm world therefore functions less as prophecy than as context. It shows the eventual appearance of a planet governed by long sustained greenhouse conditions, a planet with weaker ice systems, altered oceans, redistributed ecosystems, and biological structures profoundly unlike those surrounding modern civilization. That world was not assembled quickly, and it did not resemble a paradise. It produced extraordinary abundance in some forms, while erasing entire categories of life in others. Nothing living today, including human civilization itself, evolved for such conditions. To study the warm world is not to look backward with longing. It is to examine the deepest climatic memory Earth possesses, preserved across stone and fossil bone, waiting quietly beneath the surface of the present. Across every era preserved in the rocks beneath Earth's surface, life reveals the same underlying tendency. Whenever energy becomes abundant and conditions remain stable long enough, organisms expand outward into every available possibility. Size increases, complexity deepens, new body plans appear. Empty ecological space does not remain empty for long. The warm world stands as perhaps the clearest expression of that pattern ever discovered. For roughly 80 million years, Greenhouse conditions elevated the total energy available to marine ecosystems far beyond modern levels. Warm, shallow seas spread across continents. Nutrient circulation intensified. Plant productivity on land and microscopic productivity in the oceans fed one another continuously. Winter, the annual interruption shaping nearly all modern ecosystems, disappeared from much of the planet. Life responded immediately and relentlessly. Predator hierarchies deepened into structures more elaborate than any modern ocean currently supports. Marine reptiles evolved multiple independent solutions to open ocean hunting. Some pursued stealth through impossible necks. Others developed crushing jaws capable of splintering shell and bone simultaneously. Giant fish accelerated through inland seas at speeds rivaling modern pelagic hunters. Pterosaurs rode thermal currents above oceans dense with prey. Even reproduction, growth patterns, and lifespan shifted in response to uninterrupted abundance. None of this emerged accidentally. Life moved toward the upper limits permitted by the available energy budget of the planet. The warm world did not break biological rules. It demonstrated them with unusual clarity. The collapse followed the same logic in reverse. When the impact winter darkened the atmosphere and food chains failed, the most energy demanding organisms disappeared first. Large predators required enormous prey networks to sustain themselves. Specialized hunters depended upon stable ecosystems that no longer existed. Massive bodies, once advantageous in a world of abundance, became liabilities during sudden famine and cold. The extinction, therefore, unfolded less like punishment and more like systemic arithmetic. Energy vanished from the ecosystem faster than large specialized organisms could adapt to its loss. This dynamic repeats throughout Earth's biological history. The Cambrian explosion filled ancient seas with unfamiliar forms as oxygen and ecological opportunity increased. Devonian oceans produced armored fish dynasties under similarly expanding energy systems. Mammals radiated after the extinction because ecological space reopened and conditions once again permitted expansion. Again and again, the same principle emerges beneath different worlds and different creatures. The giants of the warm ocean were not evolutionary mistakes. They were extraordinary successes, dominant across spans of time so immense that human civilization barely registers beside them. Mosasaurs ruled for tens of millions of years. Ichthyosaurs persisted longer than whales have yet existed. Entire ecosystems formed around their presence. Yet all success in deep time remains conditional. The conditions enabling greatness eventually change, and life reorganizes accordingly. There is another layer to this story resting quietly beneath the modern world. Much of the petroleum and natural gas that powered industrial civilization originated from the compressed remains of ancient marine organisms buried during and after these greenhouse ages. Microscopic plankton, algae, and organic sediments from vanished seas became fuel across geological time. The machines that uncovered the warm world were themselves powered by the biological residue of that world. In a literal sense, the ancient oceans carried their own memory forward through stone, pressure, chemistry, and fire, waiting millions of years to become visible again through the civilization they unknowingly helped create. Time on the scale of the warm world resists ordinary thought. The human mind measures experience through seasons, generations, lifetimes, the slow erosion visible on a coastline, or the growth of a forest across centuries. 80 million years belongs to another category entirely, a duration so immense that language begins to lose proportion around it. Modern humans have existed for approximately 300,000 years. The warm world endured more than 260 times longer. Every city ever raised, every empire expanded and forgotten, every myth carried through spoken memory, every telescope pointed upward into the night sky, all of recorded history and all prehistory together, would occupy only the thinnest fraction of that span. The distance becomes stranger when placed against the movement of the planet itself. At the beginning of this long greenhouse age, the Atlantic Ocean was young and narrow, still opening between separating continents. South America and Africa had only recently parted. India drifted alone through equatorial waters, moving slowly northward across the Tethys Sea toward the collision that would eventually raise the Himalayas from the seafloor. The mountains that now shape weather across half a continent did not yet exist. Their stones still rested beneath warm water illuminated by sunlight. Across those millions of years, coastlines advanced and retreated countless times. Entire marine ecosystems appeared, diversified, and vanished before others replaced them. Species evolved into forms of astonishing scale, then disappeared so gradually that no single generation could have perceived the change unfolding around them. Yet, to the creatures living within that era, their world was not temporary. A mosasaur, moving through the western interior Seaway, inhabited a present as immediate and complete as our own. The warm currents, the immense prey populations, the uninterrupted breeding cycles, the chemical structure of the ocean itself, all would have seemed stable beyond imagination. Nothing in the daily experience of such an animal suggested that the conditions supporting its existence were finite. That may be the most difficult part of deep time to absorb. Worlds do not feel fragile while they are functioning. For 80 million years, the planet operated in this state of prolonged warmth. Polar forests expanded beneath mild skies. Inland seas divided continents. Marine predator hierarchies reached levels of complexity unmatched before or since. Biological productivity remained so high, so continuous, that giant specialized predators could persist across spans of time longer than mammals have yet dominated Earth. Generation after generation entered a living system that appeared eternal because, compared to any individual lifespan, it effectively was. Then the continuity ended. Not instantly in the human sense, but instantly in the geological sense. Conditions that had persisted across tens of millions of years collapsed within a period brief enough to appear as a boundary line in the rocks. Oceans cooled. Food webs failed. Entire dynasties vanished so completely that no descendant survived to carry even a diminished version of their existence forward. After 80 million years of continuity, the warm world passed into silence with astonishing speed, leaving only scattered bones, altered chemistry, and thin layers of mineral evidence to indicate that such a planet had ever existed at all. Long before the warm oceans vanished, Earth had already rehearsed extinction many times. Entire biological worlds had risen, flourished, and disappeared across spans so vast that each one once seemed permanent within its own age. The Ordovician seas emptied beneath advancing ice. The Devonian collapse erased ancient reef systems that had dominated for millions of years. The Permian extinction nearly silenced complex life altogether. Later came the ending of the warm world itself, and after that, still more losses, smaller in scale yet following the same underlying rhythm. None of these endings restored what came before. The planet does not rebuild by repetition. It rebuilds through alteration. After the warm world faded, the survivors inherited oceans and continents transformed by cold, instability, and interrupted sunlight. The immense reptiles that had mastered the greenhouse seas did not return in reduced form. No later predator recreated the ecological architecture they had occupied. Instead, mammals expanded into openings created by absence, carrying different advantages into a harsher climate system shaped by seasons, fluctuating temperatures, and periodic scarcity. The world that emerged afterward rewarded flexibility over grandeur. Small mammals, capable of rapid reproduction, diversified through forests and coastlines, emptied by extinction. Fur became increasingly valuable in unstable climates. High metabolic rates allowed sustained activity through cold conditions. Brains adapted for behavioral flexibility gained importance in environments where food and temperature changed unpredictably across the year. Over tens of millions of years, these traits accumulated and spread through countless lineages, eventually shaping primates. Then humans, our own bodies, still carry the imprint of that colder inheritance. Human warm blood, the ability to maintain stable internal temperature through freezing nights and changing seasons, belongs to a planetary chapter fundamentally different from the greenhouse world that came before. Human endurance, fat storage, temperature regulation, and metabolic adaptability all emerged from ecosystems where survival depended on tolerating variation rather than permanent abundance. In this sense, the extinction was not only an ending, it became an origin point for everything that followed. Yet the deeper pattern stretches beyond any single catastrophe. Life on Earth does not move steadily toward perfection or complexity. The fossil record shows expansion followed by narrowing, innovation followed by collapse, abundance followed by simplification. When energy becomes plentiful and stable over immense spans of time, ecosystems elaborate themselves into extraordinary forms. Species specialize, food webs deepen, predators and prey evolve into increasingly intricate relationships shaped by long environmental continuity. Then conditions shift. The highly specialized organisms, dependent on narrow ecological stability, disappear first. The survivors are usually smaller, broader in diet, slower in metabolism, and capable of enduring uncertainty long enough for recovery to begin again. From those remnants, entirely new worlds emerge, unrelated in structure to the ones that vanished. The warm world was one such world. It was not primitive, incomplete, or waiting to become something better. For 80 million years, it functioned as a mature planetary system operating near the upper limits of biological productivity. Its oceans supported predator hierarchies of immense sophistication and scale, sustained by environmental conditions that no longer exist. What remains now are fragments, chemical traces, compressed sediments, and scattered skeletons resting in stone, quiet evidence that Earth once carried a version of life far stranger, warmer, and more immense than the world familiar to us today. Far from the vanished inland seas and drowned coastlines of the warm world, the modern ocean turns quietly beneath the night sky, immense enough that most of it still remains unseen by the species now studying it. The Pacific alone covers approximately 165 million square kilometers, nearly half the surface of the planet. Beneath its waves lies the Challenger Deep, descending almost 11,000 meters into darkness dense enough to crush unprotected metal. Between the surface and those lower trenches stretches a volume of water so vast that sunlight touches only a thin upper skin of it. Everything below belongs to pressure, cold, and distance. Right now, somewhere within that darkness, living bodies are moving. Sperm whales are descending through black water toward depths of 2,000 meters, guided not by vision but by bursts of sound traveling through the cold. Their echolocation clicks pass through layers of ocean colder than anything known during the greenhouse seas of the mosasaurs. Giant squid drift through the midwater beneath them, their long arms suspended in near weightlessness, growing to lengths of 13 meters while remaining almost entirely hidden from human observation. Farther north, Greenland sharks move through Arctic water close to freezing, their bodies carrying metabolisms so slow that some individuals alive today may have begun swimming centuries before modern industry existed. Their movement is unhurried, less than a meter each second, a pace shaped by cold oceans and sparse energy, rather than the continuous abundance that once sustained giant reptilian predators. These creatures belong to another planetary chapter. They are descendants of a colder Earth, products of extinction, instability, and long adaptation to environments the warm world giants never encountered. The mosasaur required immense prey density and persistent warmth. The Greenland shark survives through patience and conservation. The sperm whale crosses vertical distances impossible for the great reptiles of the Cretaceous seas. The modern ocean rewards different strategies because it is a different ocean. Yet beneath every modern sea lies the record of the older one. If sediment cores are drawn upward from the seafloor and opened layer by layer, eventually a narrow band appears, rich in iridium, deposited from the Chicxulub impact. It is visible across the planet, a thin chemical interruption marking the boundary between two biological worlds. Below that line rest ammonite shells, fossil teeth, fragments of creatures shaped by 80 million years of greenhouse stability. Above it begins the colder age that produced whales, seals, penguins, deep diving squid, and eventually ourselves. The transition occupies only a small thickness of stone, an entire planetary system compressed into a line narrow enough to touch with a fingertip, and still the ocean continues. It receives river sediment from the continents exactly as it did before mammals existed. Currents move heat across the globe. Microscopic plankton bloom and fade beneath the moonlight. Nutrients rise from the deep and fall again through the water column in cycles older than vertebrate life itself. Tonight, the living forms carried within those cycles are different from the ones that crossed the warm inland seas long ago. A sperm whale descends through darkness. A Greenland shark drifts beneath Arctic ice. Countless unseen organisms move through the deep, pelagic water where sunlight has never reached, continuing the ancient, unbroken motion of life inside the sea. No creature that crossed the warm oceans understood that it belonged to an age. The mosasaur moving through the inland sea did not know it had inherited waters once ruled by ichthyosaurs and pliosaurs. The ammonites, drifting through sunlit currents, had no awareness that their lineage stretched backward across hundreds of millions of years. The first small mammals hiding beneath forests at the edge of that world could not imagine the silence that would one day arrive above them, or the openings that silence would create. Life continued forward without foresight, each generation existing entirely inside its own present. That remains true now. We do not know what world follows ours, any more than the warm world creatures understood the future waiting beyond the horizon of their time. The difference is that we have become the first species capable of looking backward far enough to perceive the shape of the larger story itself. Across centuries of patient work, fragments scattered through rock have been assembled into something approaching memory. Fossilized teeth reveal ocean temperatures. Growth rings hidden inside bones record lifespans and changing climates. Chemical traces preserved in ancient shells allow vanished seas to be measured with surprising precision. From compressed sediments and buried skeletons, an entire planetary system has slowly returned into view. This is a remarkable threshold for life to have crossed. After nearly 4 billion years of evolution unfolding without witnesses capable of understanding it, one species now sits awake beneath the night sky, reconstructing oceans that vanished tens of millions of years before the first human existed. We can trace the outlines of extinction boundaries. We can identify the moment warmth gave way to cold. We can recognize that the world familiar to us is only the latest version in a chain of worlds, each temporary, each feeling permanent while it lasted. The warm world ended completely. Its giant predators vanished. Its inland seas withdrew. Its immense reptilian dynasties passed into stone and chemistry and buried carbon. Yet from that ending came another beginning, then another after that, each built from survivors, carrying forward whatever traits allowed persistence through instability and loss. Somewhere in that chain, something small survived long enough for mammals to diversify. Somewhere in that continuity, primates emerged, then humans, then instruments capable of reading isotopes trapped inside fossil enamel older than the mountains surrounding us today. Every living person exists because life endured through catastrophes vast beyond ordinary comprehension. The carbon released by warm world organisms now moves through the modern atmosphere and oceans. Their compressed remains powered the machines that allowed humans to uncover their existence. Their disappearance shaped the colder seas that produced whales, seals, sharks, and eventually the conditions required for our own species to appear. And still the ocean continues in darkness beyond the edge of sight. Very far below the surface tonight, in cold water untouched by sunlight, ancient lineages move through pressure and silence. Sharks older than nations drift slowly through Arctic depths. Soft-bodied creatures pulse through black water where no human has ever traveled. Life persists there as it persisted before the warm world, during it, and after it, adapting quietly to conditions that never stop changing. The sea does not keep monuments, it only keeps moving. Sleep well.